when we
Sorry.
and what does change mean? So we will explain to you the process what we went through and using a specific model of social lab prototyping in a minute, and we'll explain the process and how actually we went through it, what were the issues, what were the tools, and what came out of it in the process. Christine, if we move to the agenda, the next slide. Sorry, is it moving or is it just me that's not seeing?
It's changed. We've gone onto the agenda, Ali.
It's just, yeah, it's just I couldn't see it initially. So yeah, we will initially define what is systemic change, and I think Louise touched on some of it. We will look at and the central question that the social lab explored, the actual process and methodologies of the lab itself, and then the tools used, and what was the impact, and what came out of it, and what we learned. So to begin with, and what is meant by systemic change, and I think Louise touched in some of that earlier, and it's really whatever we call it, it's first of all looking in deep-rooted and complex social issues, whether those are inequalities or other areas where we are looking and addressing the whole system. So, and that really starts with the individual or the internal condition or the mental models. We all carry particular patterns, particular and the way of looking at the world. All of that is shaped by our individual experience and collective experiences. A lot of that way of doing things, the old patterns no longer works. And I think a lot of us acknowledge that and are trying always to change and focus on the changes our provision makes. So in the broader sense, a systemic change needs to look at the policy and structures, the culture within which it sits, how we all practice certain things, what are the mental models that have been always downloaded throughout and shaped our history, what's the context, the background, the history, and crucially, what's the relationship of power? Power is at the center of all of this, and we'll explain how we kind of overcame that power issue in the social lab and methodologies that we went through. Can we move to the next slide, Christina? So this particular social lab and was done between July 22 and December 23. 18 community leaders with lived expert experience and professional experience, all of them leading organizations, and participated in this program and from a range of communities. The program is funded by Impact on Urban Health. So in addition to the contract deliverables, the standard bit of the grant, there was a grant pot on the table of £500,000 for the group and to kind of use and allocate how they saw fit following the social lab process and prototyping in particular. And the funder impact on urban health was in the room almost in all of the sessions, but did not dominate or direct or dictate the process. This was all led by the 18 participants. The process was facilitated by Ubele Initiative and Rios, and we work quite closely with Rios, and this is one of the three social labs that we've done in that period, and the others were looking at different areas. And the process of the social lab essentially it's a mixture of and what we call social lab is a 2-day workshop, essentially, some people call. And so we did 6 in total, but there are 12 sessions, if you like, 12 different days, because each one is 2 days. There was a mixture of learning journeys where the participant actually either visited or went somewhere or somebody came to them and who was working in the area that they were exploring, just to expand the learning and how things can be done. There were quite a lot of and smaller sessions online and quite a lot of work progress by individuals. And I call it homework, they call it other activities. Next slide, please. So the central question that actually was being addressed was what it takes to enable Black and racially minoritized communities in Lambeth and Southwark to feel safe. The reason in Lambeth and Southwark, because the funder, in this case, the Impact on Urban Health Foundation, and linked to the Guys and St. Thomas's Foundation, only funds and Lambeth and Southwark. And so the whole question we were looking at was safety in its broader sense. So we're not talking about just safety from crime or attacks that could be in the mix. We're talking about the broader, wider kind of sense of being safe and well-being to thrive and contribute and achieve your full potential. That's the level of safety we're talking about. So crime was not excluded, but it's not just the only thing kind of being discussed. And next slide, please. This is just a quote from our director who really designed and led this whole approach of social lab prototyping and continued the continuation of working with Rios in delivering that. And he says the main objective of the social lab is to bring communities of local experts together so that the experts, i.e. the community expert, can decide the way forward. With each of our social labs, we have money for Black communities to prototype the ideas that they come up with. This doesn't just relate to the social lab, it relates to other social labs. So we've done one that was looking at future work for young and young Black people and funded through Youth Future Foundation. And we did one funded through MERSA that was exploring services for Black elderly communities. But in all of them, in terms of when we were applying for the funding, we made sure that there was a budget for participant time, because actually contributing to these processes is contributing your both professional and lived experience. And for us, that has got to always be paid for. The time of people kind of doing these projects or processes have got to be honored. No longer we are accept a process of extractive process that doesn't just give something back to people who've given you quite a lot of valuable insights and information and changing the system, if you like. So, and prototyping with a separate budget we always have, sometimes it's quite small, i.e. 25K, not huge amount. In this case, in the safety fund, it was £500,000 thanks to the funder who were committed to this way of working and enabling communities to imagine a different future. And so this quote really encompasses all of them. So in terms of the characteristics of the social lab, what makes it different from the standard kind of way of doing things or standard workshop, if you like? In its nature, it's very experimental spaces. It involves lots of stakeholders, not only those who are immediately in the room, but as I said earlier, there are learning journeys. So that actually pulling in other experts into the discussion and the shaping and the designing of the new interventions. It's really collaborative, and the power really is kind of not just hogged by those who are in charge of budgets or have more control, and including Ubele itself. It's really examining and looking at these complex, deep-rooted causes of social issues that we all trying to address, and then in an innovative way, prototype a future we can all want to aspire to and want to be proud of. It's in itself and its nature systemic, therefore, it's collaborative, and it ends with innovation. Those are crucial components and characteristics of the social lab, whichever area you're looking at. And the design of the 2-day labs, the journeys and retreat, and it's really, really crucial. And Margaret later on will explain to us some of the other kind of stuff used in terms of appropriateness and to the groups being served. Next slide, please. A crucial and kind of center in all of our social labs and whatever tools we use. And the crucial framework of the process we use is called Theory U. And I really would encourage you to look up Theory U. There are lots of training on this, some free, some paid for. But essentially, Theory U, it's how we frame all our social lab. And it's different because actually it's a different way of looking at things. And you begin with, first of all, the left side of the U, and it's the norm. It's we always download all patterns, all way of doing things. I've always done it this way. Why change it? It works. It's those kind of, if you're somebody harmed by historical discrimination, it's all the pain and the trauma historical generation you carry. And so depending on what we're talking about in the context, we all download in these patterns and we accept them readily. We don't question, sometimes we don't challenge ourselves. This is internal I'm talking about. So we begin to really openly acknowledge that downloading past pattern no longer works. So we need to move on from that downloading of all patterns to suspending them. And by suspending those old patterns and just putting them aside, we begin to really see with fresh eyes. We begin to see in a different way. And the issue is the same, but actually our eyes, our perception is changing. And we begin to therefore redirect to enable us to sense a new field, a new kind of way of kind of perceiving those issues. And only then we're able to let go of those old patterns, of all ways of doing this. And by actually letting go, we're able to be connecting to the source and being present. And that presence in actually enables us to have open mind and curiosity, compassion with open heart, and courage with an open will. And when we achieve at that point, the youth theory really encourages, we can then let things come into us, these new ways, these new what we imagine, this new systemic change we all want into. We can let those new ideas come. We're exploring, we're looking externally, we're suspending all ways of doing things and all ways of downloading things. And only then we are able to kind of envision a new way of doing things and looking at the new world we want to achieve with clarity and intentionality at the center of it. Enable us to crystallize that new imagined world. We will be able to enact on those and begin to kind of prototype by and this is exactly, we'll come to it in a minute, show you the examples, and by linking the hand, the heart, and the head, and making things, this future world we crystallized and envisioned. And we will embody that, it says, and only then we can move into the creating of the whole future we envisage. So the process we went through in these labs actually went through all of those stages, culminating in 3 prototypes, and that we will go through in a minute as the session progresses. And I'm happy to take more questions on this later on, but that's one of the key way we framed all our social labs, including this one. Yes, Christina, move to the next one, please. Other tools used were the Canavan framework, and this really to crystallize and look at things in different spaces, whether it's chaotic, whether it's the simple, whether it's the complex. And actually by using those and in terms of challenging the safety question, and it really helped participants explore much, much deeper. We also used what is commonly known as the iceberg, but to make it cultural appropriate, we call this the YAM. And again, it's the same. It's about what's hidden and what is seen. So it's similar to, I'm sure many of you are familiar with. And it's only when we explore all of those and go through kind of what Michael calls the internal condition of the intervener first, before we even look externally, you begin to kind of prototype for systemic change and an imagined future. And in this particular case, and as I said, there were a number of prototypes developed. One of them, and again, we'll go to it in a bit more detail later on, was exploring and looking at community wealth through community asset ownership and management. So this was the idea of the group in Lambert that actually wanted to center community well-being around actually asset ownership and community spaces. Christina, can we move to the next slide? At this point, and I will come back to some of those issues, I'm going to hand over to Margaret.
Hi, good afternoon, everyone. I'm Margaret Pierre. I was one of the participants, and probably continue to be because I'm actually working on one of the prototypes. So great to meet you all this afternoon. So kind of carrying on from what Ali's been talking about, the culturally relevant methods that we used were lots of the use of body movement, use of music and nature, and the use of art. And I think the use of body movement was to kind of free people up, enable people to be freed up from all the other things that they've been thinking about. Everybody in that room All the participants were leaders of organizations, very busy, very, very challenging in some areas of their work. And to be able to come into a space and to just free yourself up by using your body helps you to land in the space and helps you to ground yourself so that you can then begin to think and think differently. So that was really helpful. And also, I suppose the culturally relevant methods of that were used in terms of being a Black person. These are our African methods, and so that it grounds you not just kind of cognitively, but it also grounds you spiritually, and that helps with your actual well-being as you leave the space as well, because you've had that experience. So it was really useful, and then use of nature and music again, nature grounding you and making you think outside of how you operate normally on a day-to-day, sort of rushing from one thing to another. And music, spiritually, just releasing you. And we were singing together as well. So not only an internal release, but actually connecting people to each other as well. Because when you do those kind of activities together, that helps to broker new relationships and connect people on a different level. So that was quite beautiful. Really enjoyed that. And then also the use of art. I think the use of being able to come into a space and create in a different way, because as leaders of organizations, we're having to often use the left sides of our brains. So we don't get to tap into the right side, which is the creative side of ourselves. So to be able to come in and just be given a piece of clay, I think the first session, when we came in, we didn't even know each other. We were given a piece of clay to create something. I can't remember what it was now. I think it was a bowl or something. But that was really powerful, because for me, that kind of just opened up that kind of creative thinking, and reminded me that I have the ability to do that. So that's this, and then again that taps into our African heritage as well. I think one of the things that, because when I was thinking about this, I was thinking, why is this so powerful? I traveled to Kenya and a few years ago, and when I stepped out of the car or the van that we were in, and I stepped onto the ground in Kenya, I actually felt a connection that I had never felt before, and I felt like I'd arrived home. And so these kind of culturally relevant methods, I think, have the impact of kind of making you, as a Black leader, feel grounded and feel at home in a space, in a landscape where often you don't feel like that. You feel quite intimidated. You feel challenged by the circumstances that you find yourselves in, in various areas of the work that you're doing. So I think I'm going to stop there. Is that okay, Ali?
That's absolutely perfect. Thank you very much. The other element of it was there was a retreat, and a 2-day retreat and it's only at that point that actually that £500 pot of money was allocated, and the group decided. Obviously, leading up to that, they all designed and by now written up concrete, what we will call a proposal, but it's actually what came out of the prototype itself. And one of them being reimagining funding, which Margaret referenced. And other kind of stuff we did that was really culturally appropriate was making sure that people shared food often and food that is culturally appropriate and relevant. So not just in the social lab, but actually going out together to have a meal. And the residential was a 2-day staying together in a conference hotel, and which again really helped. And so where we are with the 3 prototypes, so one of them is Wakanda Assets, and that one specifically is focusing on supporting community groups and to manage and own community assets. And the second one is the one that we just talked about, reimagining community, funding. And that particular one, which Margaret is working on, is a participatory grant making model. It's using an MBA draft model and kind of methodology, and it's just started. It was the end of September, so we just at the beginning of that journey. And we will be doing quite a lot of learning and sharing of these. And then the third one is really race and education, particularly having an anti-racist education and system and trying to work with regulatory bodies, schools, etc., and to implement that. And throughout all of and the 3 prototype, they've been delivered over the next 12 to 18 months. And we will be having some learning and sharing journeys. And the reports are on our website. And there is one focusing on the reimagining funding and one on the whole systems change, Black systems change in terms of process that we did. And Christina, can we,
Ali,
yeah?
can we just go back?
Yeah, that's what I was, yeah.
Yeah, let's go. Can we just go back to the navigating power and trust?
Yeah.
Yeah, because I feel I wanted to say something about that.
Yeah.
So 18 organizations, 18 leaders of organizations in Lambeth and Southwark, from Lambeth and Southwark, coming into a room. Some of us knew each other, some of us knew each other from a distance, some of us didn't know each other at all. And so in terms of building trust on a local level, this process, this lab, and the process that the U process that we went through really helped us to connect at a deeper level. So as you heard, it sort of helps you to connect or to do some internal work, which as leaders of organizations, I don't think we get enough time to do, or we don't take enough time out to do. So it was really valuable to be able to go through this U process as an individual, and then to be with other people that are going through the same process as well, and then helped us to connect on a much deeper level. So you might meet up with somebody for a coffee, but and talk about work, but this helped us to really, as we're going through this process, helps us to really build deeper and meaningful relationships. Doesn't mean that we're going to be like in each other's houses or best friends or anything, but you know, there's a significant amount of trust was developed and built up so that we could collaborate and together on this, but also on other things when you know, as we go forward. The other element, which I thought was really powerful, was actually having the funder in the room and watching the funder navigate, because the funder's given us money, right? But actually, there's a process happening which they've got to let to be totally. They've got to let go of their power in that space, and I think that they did a really good job of that. But it showed us how that relationship could be different as well, and I think understanding how that relationship can be different really was helpful in enabling us to go forward, to have different conversations with funders, and actually helped us to be affirmed in our expertise and in our experience. So that was quite powerful for myself and for others as well. The delaying of financial discussions was really interesting. I think that it's just speaking for myself, but I know that others were thinking this as well. When I first was given the opportunity to come and be part of this, it's like, but I've got so much work to do, and there's so much going on, and then when they said that they would pay for our time, then that helped a lot, because would have to go and speak to the board and justify the amount of time, because there was a significant amount of time that this took up. But that really not just affirmed myself, but it affirmed the organization. Like, if you're going to take time out and resource out of a small organization that's already, really struggling or always fighting for funding, then to do a process like this, then you need to support it financially. But that whole notion that there was £500,000, in the process that could be used for a project. At first, we didn't know anything about what that was going to look like, what that was for, but it was there. But then as we went through the process, we didn't talk about the money at all until the very final time we got together, which was on a retreat. So we did some more work on the retreat around our ideas and our prototypes. And then at probably the sort of the last afternoon, in the afternoon of the day before we were going to leave, we started talking about the financials, how this £500,000 was going to be divided amongst the projects. And, there was some really robust conversations. It wasn't that, people had to kind of make a case for what they were asking for. But because of the development of the relationships and the way in which the whole process had been set up, we had not been set up as competitors, which is how the funding system works quite often now. We weren't set up just to compete against each other. We were set up to, off the back of the relationship and the trust that we built, to kind of discuss and come to conclusions, and to sometimes compromise as well. So we had that whole the relationships and the trust that we had enabled us to do that. And so that was amazing. And it worked out really well. And then in terms of how community leadership was nurtured through this process, I think that one of the things that this process has left behind is a network of community leaders across Lambeth and Southwark that have these relationships. And even if we don't talk for the next couple of years, when we meet again, we will be able to connect via this experience, and have conversations about collaboration, and about the communities that we're serving, but in a different way. And also what it's allowed us to do is to elevate our thinking, to not just think about the problem and sit within it. It's enabled us to think about the roots of the problems, and to think about how to find different ways with different partners, and to have different conversations with funders. and different expectations from funders in terms of how we tackle the issues that we're dealing with as as community leaders and experts. I think I'll stop there.
Awesome. Thank you, Margaret. So I think over to you now, and we'll have to take any questions. Stunned silence.
Hi, I've got a question.
Hi, Nick.
Hi, how you doing, Ali? My background's in peace building and community development abroad and also here, particularly in Tower Hamlets. And also know a little bit about deliberative democracy and citizens' assemblies. And this sounds very like a lot of that work done well. So in peace building, community development, looks a lot like what you've described. And deliberative democracy and citizens' assemblies can be extractive, very surface, quite the antithesis of what you've described, but done well, they can be very like what you've described. Yeah, that's just an observation, really. I don't really have a question.
Well, no, I mean, it's really, really interesting observation because this whole theory, you particularly, and the social model and the work with Rios, all of it has links to South Africa. This was all developed in South Africa by Otto Sherman, and a lot of it was used in that space of anti-apartheid, anti-racism movement, I think. So, yeah, it does resonate with using it in other models, not necessarily just how we used it, definitely. But the idea is to make sure that the core participants and everybody involved has got equal vote, equal right, there is no power, whoever who owns the purse strings, whoever is making the final decision, that others are actually, and that means a lot, as Margaret said, some compromises and changing how we actually hog power, or actually how we don't want to voice. So people were not just left to sit quietly in the room, and they were encouraged to participate and have an input. And the various things that, including, there was lots of body movement. I have to be honest, when I first joined Ubele, the first session on day one was in Conway Hall with 30 community people. And the first thing we did was body movement. I thought, what cult have I joined? Because we were suddenly doing all of this, and I worked for local authority for years. So we never did anything like that. So, but all of that really, really, as Margaret was saying, helps the link to nature, the eating and breaking bread with each other, and builds all of that personal relationship and really reduces tensions. And when you have critical decisions around particularly resources, because that's some of the biggest challenges about resource allocation. So no, that's interesting observation and quite apt, I think.
Okay. I mean, it's no bad thing because obviously there's only so many ways to skin a cat, and so it's not surprising that lots of different people's work in the kind of community development, peace building, conflict transformation, and this area of work all gravitates in the same direction, which is a good thing.
Yeah.
If people are coming up with radically different ideas about how to do it, that might be a bit concerning. But there's obviously there's obvious ways to build trust, isn't there? Eating together, moving together. These are great things. Art, yeah.
Yeah. Thanks. Hi, Carol.
Hi, Ali. Long time. Yeah, very love. Listen, I'm so impressed by the depth of thinking and action that's gone into this. So well done, first of all. I know this was only limited to Southwark and Lambeth, and we're not based there. So, but I'm really excited, particularly about the first prototype, reimagining participatory funding, simply because, as you know, we operate in that space. And I'd love to hear a little bit more about where you've gotten to with that. And what the plans are for the next stages, and whether it's the intention to open that up, because if something's already happening, we'd love to contribute to that, bring some of our expertise and also learn, rather than working in silence.
Yeah, that is first of all music to my ears, and I'm sure Margaret's, but I don't think you know each other. So Carol have set up from scratch, and now the Avocado Foundation, recently named as the foundation, they do the Dragon's Den, which you may have seen, and bring in funders and community groups. And she's been really a sterling support for Black and racialized community groups to access and resources and funding in equitable way. I think there will be a meeting between the two of you, and there's a great scope to work with each other on this. We are now just began the implementation, and part of the idea and the work Margaret will be doing is to connect people like you and other funders, and to say, actually, well, this is a model, another way of kind of developing and delivering grant systems. And I think we already had initial discussions with some of the funders. I think Margaret Fellow, because we did a learning and sharing session with London funders as part of the Festival of Learning. And so, yeah, definitely. I don't know whether you want to add to that, Margaret. But
Yeah, I'd love to speak to you, Carol. We're just at the beginning of the trying to get funders to the table. So at the end of November, we want to have a roundtable discussion because the idea is we've got a model that's come through as part of the prototype to prototype, and we want to co-design that with funders, so that and then test it. So at the moment, we're speaking to funders, and hopefully we'll have a few funders that will come to the table and join us and come along on the journey with us. So I would love to speak to you and any other funder that's on this call. I'm going to put my email address in the chat. Yeah, so if you can contact me afterwards, and yeah, we can have a conversation and see what we can do together. But yeah, thank you. I'd love to talk to you. Thank you.
I will
Nice.
share the links to the reports, because one of them is particularly about this prototype and the next steps for implementation, definitely.
That would be good to see. I also noticed, just final question before I let other people speak. Francis has asked a really good question in the chat, and I wanted to build on that. So not so much how you deal with conflict, but it's more how you deal with different views, because we'll have different backgrounds. We're not a monolith,
Yeah.
Black people. And certainly over the last decade, I've seen that we do have quite a lot of sometimes opposing views. So what's the plan? Or if you like, what's the ethos? How do you have anything in place for approaching
Yeah.
those kind of
So-
difficulties when you face them?
Yeah, so what really helped, I think, in this particular social labs that we had, we knew from the beginning that there will be some people not knowing each other, some people through historic may not think in the same space. We also knew, whether it's this social lab or the others, that there was money on the table, and when money on the table, always there are, issues of, resource allocation and how does that go. But as Margaret said, particularly with this, from the very beginning, quite intentionally, we said the money, it's the last conversation. This is not about the money. The money is available, and it's you who are deciding on it. But actually, what's more interesting is the process and the relationship building that we're going through. And there were quite moments where people had to let go of things that included the funder, Ubele, but also the participants. So in the discussion, we can't gloss over everything. There were times, they were not conflict, I wouldn't call them, but there were times that we were having conversations where there were differential of view. And how we came up with that, I think it's, first of all, giving everybody the space to be heard. I think that's really crucial. And people are not heard. There's a gripe that they carry with them that just festers. So to expunge some of those is to really make sure everybody's heard and that the final decision is consensual. So whether people actually were for that decision or no, there's a degree of ownership by the end result. And just having those core principles and reiterating this is a collective. It's not individual. There's no power here. There's no Ubele but more powerful than participant or funder more powerful than all of us. I think all of those also really, really help to kind of engender that kind of trust. And when there was a challenging conversation, people therefore understood I'm not the target. I'm not being attacked. This is just a different view to achieve same outcome. So yeah, it's challenging. We're all humans and we carry these things with us. But definitely acknowledging those things up front is crucial.
Right. Okay. All right. So I guess you're still working through established, agreed processes for resolving
The
them.
implementation. So no, all of the social labs have moved from the social lab prototyping phase. So that's phase 1, if you like.
Okay.
And are now moving to the implementation phase.
Right. Okay.
So actually, the prototype that came out has got money attached to it now, each of the 3 from that 500K pot, and each one of them is being delivered differently by a subgroup. So the bigger group 18 has been divided into 3 groups, each delivering a different element. Or it's just we're lucky that Margaret is actually the person who's also delivering the participatory grant making one.
Thank you.
Yeah.
I just want to nip to Francis because I'm conscious Francis
Sure.
question in the chat first, and I just want to see if that answers your question, Francis, before we move on. Yeah.
Francis muted.
Let's assume yes, and we can always go back. Shall we come to you, Eleanor?
Yeah.
Yeah. I'm always conscious that it's very boring. As the only disabled person, seemingly, in this panel, I'm always the one who asks about were they disabled participants? Were they considerations put to accessibility? I know, Ali, you mentioned movement, which I know it's great, but, it usually makes disabled people, well, those who have mobility issues anyway, feel excluded. I mean, what kind of considerations were put into those for activities and events? I know this. It does seem boring, but I'm always the one who asks these things because
I think it's really crucial, and actually Christina will tell you that's really high on our personal radar as somebody who coordinated the project. One of our directors himself is on a walking stick with mobility issues. In all of the body movement that we do, Drew does, it's always emphasized from beginning. If you can't, fully get up from the chair, etc., you do minimum as much as you can from within your ability. All the sites we use were accessible. All the kind of we made sure that people's needs were met as and when. I think Christina, there was I'm trying to remember her name. She wasn't in this lab, but she was in another lab. So there was a person who was actually quite disabled, an older woman in one of the other labs that we catered for her needs as she needed them. There wasn't anybody who was like wheelchair disabled at that level, but we know from the 18 cohort there were different needs across the piece. Margaret, Christine?
Yeah, I think my co-CEO was a participant. He has heart issues and is diabetic as well. So in terms of the food, there was, food played a big part. So that, those considerations have to be taken that has been taken into consideration in particular for him. Because there were some things that he could not engage with in terms of food, and also he's not very mobile, so but he felt very comfortable. He didn't feel excluded from the movement activities.
Sorry, hi everyone. Really nice to meet you. So I was project managing the safety project, and for me, in terms of my how I am, I really do like building up relationships and stuff. So when it came to each of the participants, I tried being able to get to know them. At the very start of the journey, we had like discussions, like interviews, like one-to-ones, to be able to understand the individual. And then also like throughout, so when I was meeting people, I was kind of trying to meet them where they're at. And then in terms of the program is to kind of engage with them with the program to make sure that they're not excluded. So like, for example, yeah, like I think it became like the detail, like in terms of the way we took people out to residentials and stuff, to we wanted them to feel kind of comfortable with I guess like the process, but also just because we didn't want the process to only be contained to just the space, because we know that like when people go out of the spaces they tend to forget. So I guess that in terms of the space, I think it was like always constantly emphasized through the interactions that that I had, and that the facilitators had with the participants, to ensure that we have that long lasting relationship. I also want to do like a call to action to for you guys to encourage your funders to participate in the program, being an observer of the whole process and seeing it for what it was. It was really encouraging, like, they're speaking about their prototypes, but actually to see the individuals like have like they're amazing individuals. Like Margaret is doing incredible things at the moment, but to see the fact that a lot of what we did notice is that a lot of the organizations would use their own money to be able to fund the work that they're doing. They weren't going to funders directly, but actually that changed. They saw value in what they were doing, and now they're doing things, being on boards and furthering their studies and stuff. Seeing it from the funders' perspective, it was really interesting, because I think sometimes funders can have like a certain narrative of where they want organizations to go, and how to spend money. But actually, listening to the funder, they took that seat back and realized actually that there didn't need to be any intervention from them to support the work. Like if there was intervention, like I think they were trying to do, because a lot of the organizations, some of them work in criminal justice, there was a push for criminal justice, but they realized that actually that's not what they want. That's not what makes the organizations feel safe, like to remove the barriers and answer the question. And so that was quite an interesting dynamic. So it'd be really, so my call to action is for you to encourage your funders to work with us and do more of this work, because it was really transformative, but with the organizations, but also the individual leaders, and seeing where they are now and seeing the difference in terms of how they're working together, but then also seeing the funder like have that really close relationship, something that I think can't really be achieved if I think then there isn't more things like this that we could do to support anti-racism and stuff. But yeah, thank you.
Can I add to my comment? Yeah, I think I'm on.
Please, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I hear, and I like that you do look at individual barriers, but when I talk about accessibility, most organizations, funders, because I have a Propel funding as well, usually look at sort of like, lifts and ramps and things. But I'm talking about in more kind of accessibility in a broader sense. And here we're talking about culture. And there is also something called disability culture, which isn't always manifested by disabled people's organizations. But if there are funders here, I would think that it's a good opportunity to look at that and include that in other cultures, as in Black culture, African culture, East and Southeast Asian culture. So I just wanted to add that, and we will be quite happy to talk to people who want to know more about that. Thank you.
Thank you. That's really helpful, Anna. Any other query, question, reflection? I think, Nick, you put something on the chat, not clear to
Yeah,
me.
I'm just I'm quite confused. It might just be me, but you've talked about social lab with older people, younger people, reimagining funding, and also the kind of research question, if you like, in your slideshow was about what would it take to enable Black and minoritized communities in Lambeth and Southwark to feel safe? Can you clarify, like,
Yeah.
I'm a bit confused about the
Sure.
reimagining funding and
Yeah.
that bit. Was
No.
that the same thing or
So,
different?
so at the start of all of this, and we had access to a grant from Impact on Urban Health to look at, it's called the Safety Fund. It's from the innovation budget. And specifically, it was to look at what does it take to make Black communities feel safe. Now, safe was defined as not necessarily only from crime and etc. And personal safety issues, but in its broadest sense. It was up to the group of leaders and to decide and determine what does that actually mean and what do they want to prioritize or focus on. Throughout, particularly the initial stages, there was quite a lot of talk about criminal justice and safety around that. And members have not abandoned that. And in fact, there's slightly underspent from the 500K. But the prototype that emerged, that the three subgroups from the 18 members came out with, were these three prototypes we talked about. So, and one group said, what makes our community feel really safe, grounded, and sense of well-being through generations is that these community spaces that we're increasingly losing, we need to retain them, whether we own those, manage those, but it has to be a long-term vision and that actually has an intergenerational approach, etc. Another group said, actually, we are seriously concerned about the education system. We think it's harmful to our young and Black and racialized kids. It's harmful to our communities. It's crucially also harmful to society because if young people are not qualified and fully engaged, actually they're less productive and society needs to intervene, government needs to intervene more. So we need to have an anti-racist education. Prototype number 3 was then looking into this kind of reimagining funding. And once you see the report, you will see that actually the model used is a draft MBA model for kind of funders to kind of select and how they allocate grants. It's a different way of looking into that. So yes, that this question you raised, Nick, often came up. It came to me straight away when I first read the paper. I was like, "Wait, we're doing safety? What?" So I was like that. But actually, this was what came out of it. The safety was defined by the funder in very broad term. And we have a whole document on it that talks about the container, etc., which initiated all of this, but the group shaped it, and just using Rios and us as the facilitators and the various tools.
Can I jump in there as well and just explain that as a participant, the work that I do has been working with young people who are at risk of being involved in violence and working with young people and young adults who are involved in gangs, etc. So when I went to the lab and when we were looking at the beginning, we did this work around safety and defining what safety is right at the beginning of the U process. And I, in my head, safety is all about keeping young people safe and, stopping them from killing each other or maiming each other. And then all of the other violence that happens. So that's what safety was clearly defined in my psyche as. And so I kind of struggled a little bit at the beginning with like, so why but as we went through the process, I was able to let go of that definition and see it as a, in its broader sense, and look at the root causes. So I know what the root causes are, of not being safe, and then having kind of suspended that, was able to kind of really get engaged with in a different conversation around, well, some of this is about how funding is being distributed, and we need to look at that. And so that's how that kind of conversation started for a few of us.
Okay, thanks.
Ashley, did I see your hand raised? Yeah.
Yeah, thank you so much. That was really insightful. Really happy to have learned from you today. We're one of the Propel grantees, and so I guess I'm like getting a sense of like where we're at alongside other grantees. I think just to pick up on Nick's question, was this I totally understand the question around safety and actually how community finances and resources play a really active role in that. We've been having a similar discussion here at Queer Circle with we call them networks rather than labs, but same ethos. I guess I'm just trying to understand just how, was this an application made to Propel, or was this a commission from Impact on Urban Health? Just so that I understand.
Nothing to do with Propel. The only link to Propel, as I clumsily explained earlier, in my role as Ubele, myself and our CEO, our partners, the equity partners, on Propel London. And so that brings together the funders and the 5 equity partners: Women Resource Centre, Inclusion London, where Nick works, and Here Network, and us, representing all kind of main for the consortium, LGBT consortium. And so, yeah, we have that kind of role. I know Louise quite well. We meet kind of regularly, and we're involved in the designing of the whole Propel and kind of trying to make sure. Yeah.
Thank you. Sorry, I was just trying to like understand.
This was funded entirely by an Impact on Urban Health Foundation based in Southwark and Lambeth. Yeah.
Thank you. Really, that does clarify things. Thank you. What is the you may have already said this, sorry, but like what is the trajectory for these projects that are being incubated now?
So the idea is that these prototypes will be delivered in full. They have a clear kind of deliverables or work plan, if you like. Throughout their journey, we'll have intermittent kind of learning and sharing sessions. We'll do webinars, etc. And the idea is that for each of them to realize their vision or what they wanted to implement. So in the case of Wakanda Asset, for example, we're working with 8 groups in total, 4 in Southwark, 4 in Lambeth, and using that prototype pot of money, if you like. And by the end of the work with them, these 4 groups will be able to manage the community spaces better, being able to sustain them better, connect with the community. So there are 6 models they go through: governance and leadership, connected community, and all of it. So they'll be moving on in achieving that and thereby delivering better services to meet the aspiration and needs of the local people in those Southwark and Lambeth area. Reimagining funding is really about encouraging funders to do funding differently using this model that's being developed. And the Enterprise Education is really trying to work with big stakeholders from government, but also with parents, with families, with schools, to say, actually, we need to change this because it's not working for anybody, including schools and society, and not just individuals. So we hope, we have a great expectation for all of them to be successful as we go forward. Yeah. And definitely we'll share the learning either through here or elsewhere.
Yeah, I look forward to that. Thank you. And just one final question, if I can.
Yeah.
It was interesting you mentioning around place-based funding. So obviously this was specifically for Lambeth and Southwark.
Yeah.
I'm curious if anything's come up at this stage around how you navigate working with place-based funding for a community that isn't necessarily just place-based.
Sorry,
I
I
okay.
didn't answer the question. Say it again.
That's okay. We come up with a similar, let's call it a hurdle, I guess, where funders are place-based.
Yeah,
But as an organization, for us, we support LGBTQ plus people, right?
yeah.
So we are based in Greenwich, but our reach is beyond Greenwich boundaries, I guess.
Yeah.
So I was just wondering if any of that had come up in your discussions or the labs, and whether a model was appearing that could be transferable beyond those boroughs itself.
I think the model can be transferable beyond. So we use the same kind of methodology, social prototyping, working areas, etc., across other labs that looked at other areas and in different localities. So this was just determined by the funder in terms of localities rather than, yeah.
Got it. Thank you so much.
That's any other reflection, question, insight?
If there aren't any other questions, I'd just quite like to chip in. Firstly, to say thank you. And I've been aware of this work for a while, but to hear it sort of packaged in a different way was really lovely. And Margaret, I think everything that you said about sort of, it was almost about kind of creating the conditions to do this kind of work. And I think that's something that from where I sit in Propel, I'm thinking about this quite a lot. And it's all quite simple, isn't it, really, this sense of humanness. And in order to do this really big and really difficult work, we need to feel comfortable. We need to feel comfortable with the people we're doing it with, because systems are, whatever the system, we could sit here and list them all, spend the rest of the day trying to list the systems, but they're not set up to make us feel comfortable broadly. And so in order to kind of address them or tackle them or start to think about them or even just kind of write them all down, it can be so overwhelming. So this sense of kind of rooting this work in a space of kind of comfort and familiarity in order to make us feel strong and able to kind of address them, I think really, really struck out to me. And I think often that sense of, like I say, that sense of humanness and acknowledging the conditions that it takes for us as an individual to be ourselves rather than leaders of that organization or representatives of that organization or the face of that community. We're people first, and I think that gets lost, and I think you brought that across so beautifully. So thank you for that. I know that really kind of landed with me, and I think this program is such a brilliant example of the power that taking that time to recognize people first and relationships first, the real power that can have longer term. So just kind of hats off and thank you for sharing that to all of you. And this is the first of these sessions for Propel. So I know there were some questions about kind of who's in the space, and I've shared that in the chat. This was a session for Propel grantees. And I'd really like moving forward, if we're to do one of these a month, one of these every couple of months, to be a space for Propel grantees to come and share what you're learning, what approaches you've taken, what's worked, what hasn't worked, because failure is so important in this space. But also we'll be bringing in voices from outside, whether that's friends of Propel from other work that they've done. Because I think we can get really bogged down in this sense of like, what's the definition of systems change? What do we mean by systems change? I kind of want to throw that out the window and just say, what approaches have we come up with? What have we tried? What's worked? What hasn't worked? And then we can share it and we can discuss it and we can agree and we can disagree and we can learn from each other. So we have, and Margaret, I'll come to you in a second, I can see your hand. We've got this all Propel Partners Away Day coming up on the 21st of November, which hopefully you're all able to make. And we'll be starting to have some more of these conversations about different approaches to systems change, and also starting to look at, what's next for Propel. So I really hope we get to see lots of you in that meeting session, day, whatever you want to call it. So thank you for coming. And Margaret, I'm going to pass over to you because you put your hand up.
Yeah, I just wanted to add to what you were saying, in terms of the humanness, but the other part that was really crucial was the transference of power from the funder to the leaders in the room. I think that that suspension of the funder's power and that redistribution of power was vital. And all the work that we're doing, that's kind of that ingredient is necessary. Otherwise, it's not going to work. So I just wanted to add that bit. Sorry. Thank you.
No, don't apologize. And that's a really huge part. And, hopefully Ali and Nick, who are involved in the kind of behind the scenes of Propel, will kind of testify that what we're also aiming to achieve through Propel is this change in how funding works. And I'd like to talk to you a bit more about that, Margaret, because it's quite big on my mind in and out of work. And I'm curious, actually, how transparent were funders, or have you found funders to be about the challenges in handing over that power? Because sometimes there's just this kind of sense of, oh, well, we'd like to do that, but we can't. And I think often there's a translation issue in understanding the why. So I'd quite like to ask that question, then I promise I'll bring us to a close.
We haven't had that much experience of having those conversations yet. Impact on urban health, they came to the table with that in mind. So they'd already, they've identified that and they've already had those conversations internally. We're talking to a couple of other funders who attended a session last November, who want to be part of the conversation. But I think part of the conversation is acknowledging that power issue. But I don't know if they've kind of got to that point yet. So that is going to be part of the conversations that we're going to have as part of this process.
Well, I might pick that conversation up with you elsewhere.
Please do. Yeah, that'd be great. Thank you.
Carol, I can see you've got your hand up again.
I think Ali's hands were up before mine, so happy to go after him. No, you happy? Okay, all right, sorry. Yes, I was just going to say, having conveyed the Dragon's Den for 11 years, I've had a lot of conversations with funders on the record and off the record. And I think just from my observation, what I noticed is that there are quite a number of people doing this already, some quite well, some much further along than others. And what would be great would be to try to pull some of these ideas and efforts together, if at all possible, so that we can learn from each other. But it's just that, like people have noted, the more money is at stake and the bigger the institutions, the harder it is. Because some people will tell you, yes, the delivery team, the assessment team might be willing to let go of power, but if it's written into their systems, it's really hard for them. And the more layers there are, the harder it is. But I will say the one thing I see that's made a difference is when people are really willing, to be vulnerable, to put themselves out there, not be afraid to make mistakes, course correct. That's the one thing. So if you're willing to be accountable, I think that really plays a key role in shifting minds. I always talk about City Bridge Foundation, the fact that they're very willing to record and put on YouTube their grant assessment panel decisions has been a game changer for them because it sharpens everyone's mind before they go in. They know this is being streamed live to the public. They come, and most people will check themselves when they're in public, and that's what you want. It's the seatbelt rule, if you like. When you know that you're going to be, it's good for you, but if no one's watching, who wants a seatbelt? But you know that you're going to be fined. So you do the thing that's good for you. So we had to find ways of helping and strongly encouraging people to do that which is right and which works. So yeah, that's my own little contribution.
Thank you for that. We've lost a couple of people now, and I think we might have come to a fairly natural end. If it's all right with everybody, I'd like to share the recording with everyone. I've had a couple of requests in the chat to share the recording, so if everyone's happy to do that. And Ali, Margaret, are you happy to share your slides as well with folks that have been here? What we might do is put this on the Propel website, but I'll double check with you if that's all right. But yes, we'll share that out to everybody. And if any Propel grantees do want to have you don't have to commit to it, but want to have a conversation about maybe sharing your ideas, some of the work that you're doing in a session like this, then we'd absolutely love to hear from you. If you don't feel too ready just yet, we can start that conversation and kind of, plan something for a little bit further down the line. But hope to see as many of you as possible on the 21st. If you've got no idea what I'm talking about, I'll put a link to the day in the chat. But yes, just a massive thank you to everybody for coming and spending your lunchtime with us. I really appreciate it, and thank you to everybody who's presented.
Thank you, Liz. Really appreciate it. Yeah, and yeah, you can share. Anybody who wants to talk to us, yeah, we're quite happy to.
Great. Thank you so much.
Bye all. Thank you.
Bye.
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 Bye.